We're going to turn now to the U.S. presidential elections. We have here in the United States the longest political season of just about any country that says it has a democracy. I think it's only a 6-week period before a British election. But here we have over 400 days to go in the run-up to this election. And we go through this long primary process, of course. And it has begun with the first debates just a few weeks ago. We're now joined by Marjorie Cohn from somewhere in California. Where are you, Marjorie?
I'm in San Diego.
San Diego, California. Thank you very much for joining us. We were introducing you as the author. Of course, you are a professor emerita at Thomas Jefferson University, is that correct? And the former president of the National Lawyers Guild. And you have written a piece recently that first appeared in Truth Out, and that was republished by us on Consortium News, entitled Kamala Harris's Distinguished Career of Serving Injustice. And I want to talk to you about that, and thank you for joining us on this premiere edition of CN Live. Kamala seemed to be waffling a bit on the busing issue after her confrontation with Joe Biden in that first debate.
Yes, she planned this very theatrical confrontation with Joe Biden, where she called him out on his refusal to support federally mandated busing back in the day, leaving the impression that, in fact, she supported federally mandated busing. And the next day, she backed off from that and said, well, it's just one tool in the toolbox. So she actually really gained a lot of support, gained many points in the polls for doing that, left him with egg on his face. And in fact, turns out that she has exactly the same position he does on busing, which is that it should not be federally mandated. It's one tool among many for desegregation.
Has she suffered any consequences for that?
There's been something in the media about it. I think there have been some articles. Some of the talking heads have mentioned it. I don't know that her poll numbers have then fallen because of that. I think that she's probably got more positives out of it than negatives.
That's interesting. Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, it's really disappointing to see candidates get that much publicity on what appears to be a stance, only to, quietly sort of walk it back the next day. But I did read your piece on Truth Out, and that was republished, as Joe mentioned, on Consortium News. It really was amazing to read about all of these other instances of, what it looks like really corrupt and egregious behavior by somebody who then presents herself as a progressive prosecutor. There were instances that you mentioned in your article that I had never heard about, even, following things relatively closely. Can you tell the audience a little bit about some of the items of corruption that you discussed in your article?
Well, I'll tell you very briefly a list of things, positions she's taken, actions she's taken that are much less than progressive, and then talk about 2 cases that are particularly egregious where she supported outrageous prosecutorial misconduct. She refused DNA testing for Kevin Cooper, a very likely innocent death row inmate. She opposed state regulation or requiring that police wear body-worn cameras. She favored criminalizing truancy for kids, raising cash bail fees, keeping prisoners locked up because they provide cheap labor. She favored arresting undocumented, she favored turning over to ICE arrested juveniles who were undocumented. She covered for corrupt police lab technicians. She blocked gender confirmation surgery for a transgender prisoner, and the federal court found that denying that surgery to that transgender person constituted cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment. She opposed legislation when she was the Attorney General of California that would have required that the Attorney General independently investigate police shootings that resulted in death. And she refused to prosecute Steve Mnuchin for the foreclosure scandal, where some 80,000 people lost their homes in an illegal pattern, and he gave her a $2,000 contribution to her campaign shortly thereafter. Her own Attorney General's Consumer Protection Bureau was saying, you should file some kind of lawsuit against this practice, but she didn't do it. Now, back to the egregious prosecutorial misconduct. In Orange County in California, for years, perhaps decades, there has been an illegal program of collaboration between the Orange County Sheriff's Department and the Orange County District Attorney, where they plant informants in the jails and put them close to inmates who already are represented by counsel, and have them extract statements from these inmates and then try to use them in court. That violates the Sixth Amendment. And this was such really a scandal that a federal judge, lower court judge, held 2 hearings over a 6-month period with 39 witnesses, and found that many of the prosecutors and police officers had lied, and in fact recused the district attorney from further participation in a death penalty case. Recusing means that the DA is no longer going to be prosecuting the death penalty phase of the trial. It would be the attorney general who takes over the prosecution. That was Kamala Harris. She opposed the recusal and tried to smooth over what the district attorneys had done, basically covering for them, so much so that the appellate court called her out on that. There was another case in California as well, where the prosecutor fabricated a confession and then gave it to the defense attorney in discovery, knowing that the defense attorney was talking to the defendant about a possible plea bargain. And so in reliance on this confession that he didn't know was false, the defense attorney went to the client to try to persuade the client to plead guilty. And of course, that undermined trust between the lawyer and the client. And the court found that this was egregious, that it shocked the conscience, and reversed the conviction. And Kamala Harris, the Attorney General, was arguing that the shock the conscience standard is only met when there's physical brutality. In other words, other egregious misconduct would not shock the conscience and result in a dismissal. And so right down the line, and there are a few exceptions where she's taken more so-called progressive positions, but the overwhelming thrust of Kamala Harris's prosecutorial record as a district attorney for many years and later Attorney General of California has been nothing like progressive.
We're speaking with legal scholar Marjorie Cohn from San Diego about the Democratic primary process, and specifically about Senator Kamala Harris, who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination. She's presenting herself as a progressive. There doesn't seem to be any doubt that the Bernie Sanders insurgency of 2016 has moved a lot of these candidates to try to at least position themselves as progressive, and muddying the understanding of what that really means. Do you think, Marge, that there is any hope for someone who is more truly progressive, someone like Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, or Bernie Sanders? Or do you think that the Democratic National Committee, the established Democrats, will try to sabotage their campaigns and the media, with the compliance, of course, with the media?
Well, there is a struggle going on within the Democratic Party, where Nancy Pelosi, in an interview with Maureen Dowd, was disparaging some of the new younger progressive congresswomen, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and she is tacking much more to the center, agreed with Mitch McConnell on a bill that did not do anything to protect migrants at the border. And we have an emergency going on now at the border. So there is this struggle within the Democratic Party. Now, if you watch the two Democratic primary debates, you would see that Bernie Sanders' fingerprints were all over the topics in the debates, and his campaign, and it's not just a campaign, it's really a movement that he built since he ran against Hillary Clinton in the primary in 2016. His movement, which has continued, has really affected and influenced the other Democratic candidates. And so we have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but interestingly, although there are a lot of similarities, there are some real differences between their positions. Now, Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. He's not really a socialist. He's more like a New Deal Democrat in the tradition of FDR. But you have the positions of universal health care, student loan forgiveness, free public college, taxing the rich, green energy, climate change, et cetera, which were all featured in the two debates. Now, in terms of Sanders versus Warren, Sanders appeals to lower income, less educated people. Warren appeals more to people with postgraduate degrees. Sanders performs better with men, Warren with women. Younger people are much more likely to vote for Sanders, seniors much more likely to vote for Warren. But there is tremendous overlap in their positions. And I think that Bernie's positions have really gained traction with many, many people in this country, particularly young people who have not been particularly enthusiastic about elections in the past, who are working for him, who are out there putting forth his ideas. So I think there is real room. And of course, Tulsi Gabbard is very good on non-intervention issues, although she's not against military intervention. She's just against so many military interventions, but she is progressive on that issue. So I think that there is real room in the cards here for a progressive Democrat to get the nomination and ultimately to beat Donald Trump, of course, which is the primary consideration. Although people who say, don't criticize any of the Democratic candidates, don't dirty them because we just need to beat Trump. This is the period of time during the next several months where we distinguish between the candidates, where we decide, where we look at their policy position and their politics and their records, and we determine who would make the best president, who is the best person to beat Donald Trump. And I think that's the frame of mind that we have to have in the next period of time.
Do you think only a progressive could beat Trump, or could Biden actually defeat Trump, or even Harris?
Okay, those are different questions. Do I think only a progressive can beat Trump? No, I don't. Do I think Biden could beat Trump? No, I don't. Because Biden has only really been on the public stage recently in the debate and in a few interviews and a few talks, a few speeches. Biden has a tendency, and this goes way, way back, aside from his politics, which are very centrist, very moderate, not progressive in the least, but he has a tendency to put his foot in his mouth every time he opens his mouth. He is not articulate. He does not think things through before he speaks. And as he gets older, I'm saying this as someone who is also getting older and realizing that we get less articulate as we get older. And I think Biden is showing that. So I'm not sure one-on-one. I'm not saying that Trump is so articulate, but Trump has that reality show persona, which has gotten him to where he is. Against all conventional wisdom, but I think that he would walk all over Joe Biden. In terms of Kamala Harris, could she beat Trump? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. There are people who would not vote for her because she's a woman, not vote for her because she's Black. But I think that her record will hurt her because of the things that I said. Now, could she hold her own on a debate stage with Trump? I think she could. I don't think she'd take any guff from him. For example, the way that he was hovering behind Hillary Clinton at that debate during the 2016 election. So I think it's early. I think that these polls, every day there's different polls and the media's all over this one's higher, that one's lower. They're kind of meaningless really at this point because the election is so far away. So I think it's really our job to look at the candidates, distinguish between them, and support the most progressive candidate or candidates to ultimately get the nomination and run against Trump in the election.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, so building on that point, a lot of people have speculated that one of the reasons that the DNC has been flooded by primary contenders is to spoil the race for Bernie Sanders. Do you think that it's basically a strong likelihood that that will happen and we'll see somebody like Kamala Harris become the nominee? And if that does happen, you know, will her record that you've discussed in your article actually see the light of day from other news outlets, from major corporate outlets, or do you think it's effectively going to be basically put under the rug?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, the DNC undercut Bernie Sanders' candidacy and paved the way for Hillary Clinton's nomination, which I think was one of the biggest political disasters of our time. But in terms of Kamala Harris, if she does get the nomination, I think that the corporate media will be thrilled. That she's photogenic and they've already been very enamored with her. It's going to be, I'm afraid, up to us in the alternative media to really put her record on trial. And I do think that I don't know that Trump, if she did get the nomination, I don't know that Trump would challenge her on any of these issues because he is not progressive in any way, shape, or form. But I do think we're going to have to fight to get her record before the public if she is to get the nomination. And of course, it's a long ways away. There are many people who are not happy with what she did with Joe Biden. I mean, and again, say don't pay attention to the polls. She did rise in the polls right after that. But I think there was a bad taste in people's mouths. Forget the prosecutorial record. When people are calling it a cheap shot. That was obviously rehearsed, very dramatic. I was that girl who was bussed, making it look like she was very progressive on the issue of busing, and Joe Biden was not, and it was really a charade.
Marjorie, the Democratic National Committee changed the rules about the nomination process that the only on the second ballot. I'm losing the name of these special people that they choose who get a vote, whether they're a delegate or not. But only on the second ballot that those people can come in and vote, and not on the first. So there's been speculation that that's one reason they also put so many candidates out there, that they would have to go to a second ballot, and then these people would get that vote. Why can't I remember the name of that of those people I'm talking about? The special delegates.
Superdelegates?
Superdelegates.
Yeah, I thought they were doing away with the superdelegates, but I haven't heard what you're
No, they are allowed to vote on the second ballot at the nominating convention, not on the first. So if there were so many candidates out there, they could split the vote and none of them would get a sufficient number to win the nomination. Then it'd have to go to the second ballot. And guess what? The superdelegates would step in and choose the establishment candidate. Have you not heard that?
I hadn't heard that, and that's very disturbing. I think that there is, from what you say, there is a possibility that could happen, and that would be quite disturbing.
So when you talked about the different groups that support Warren and Sanders, old for one, young for other, women for Warren, men for Sanders, sounds like that would make a pretty nice ticket.
Yes, it would make an excellent ticket. In fact, that would be my dream ticket would be Sanders Warren. I think it's a winning ticket. Because they do appeal to different constituencies. People tend to lump them together because they're both so progressive, especially on economic issues, but not just economic issues. That would be a dream ticket. Yes.
Do they get along personally? Do you know?
I think they do. Yes, I think they do. Everything I've seen is that there is good chemistry between them.
And Bernie would have the presidency and Warren the vice president.
Well, either way, I would be. I would support the ticket either way. Of course, I have to say right now, and I think this is really, really important for people to understand. We have to fight like hell to get the most progressive candidate to win the Democratic nomination. But once that primary is over, once the primaries are over, and once that candidate is chosen, our number one goal needs to be to get rid of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has, and I don't want to say he's been a one-man wrecking ball, because he's had his prostitutes. He's had his Attorney General William Barr. He's had Mitch McConnell, who has done his bidding in spades and in a very dangerous way. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, although he did hand Trump a defeat in the census case, which was a big victory for the people. I think we need to celebrate our victories. They're few and far between. And Trump has endangered the world so much. I mean, I understand that he and I think when he does things that are positive, we have to admit that and celebrate that. For example, negotiating. Of course, he's created a lot of hassle in the first place, but negotiating with Kim Jong-un in North Korea is a good thing, not a bad thing. When he walks into North Korea from the demilitarized zone, I think we need to celebrate that. That's good. It's not formal diplomacy, but it's a first step. I think when he tries to tamp down, I don't know that he's doing it so much now, but tamp down tensions with Russia, where the two leading nuclear armed countries in the world are the US and Russia, is a good thing, not a bad thing. But regardless, I think that overall, what he has done in this country, the way he has really made people's lives so much more miserable, and particularly immigrants. Now, certainly Obama did his share of deportations. He did not have a progressive immigration policy by any means. But I don't think that he separated, I know that he did not separate parents from their children across the board the way that Trump has done, and lock these children up in what really amounts to concentration camps. And the list goes on and on. So I do think we need to pick the best, most progressive candidate, and then we need to support the Democratic nominee. And we all need to get on that bandwagon and defeat Trump. I think it's really critical.
Interesting you say that, because given the class interests of very rich and powerful Democrats, do you think that they would prefer Trump to be reelected than Sanders or Warren? That they might endanger their own class interests?
I think there are some certainly that fall in that category, but I think by and large, and of course, again, this is anecdotal and based upon my opinion only, I think that most Democrats, the overwhelming majority of Democrats, really want to get rid of Trump. Now, that said, when Bernie Sanders did not get the nomination, my understanding and my memory is that 10% of Bernie voters voted for Trump, which I think is incredibly disturbing, but also says a lot about what a terrible candidate Hillary Clinton was. Any Democrat should have been able to beat Trump in a heartbeat. And the fact that I know millennials just hated her, did not trust her. That was a strategic and tragic error on the part of strategy on the part of the DNC to edge Bernie out in favor of Hillary Clinton and to actually allow her to become the nominee.
Elizabeth?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, myself, I did not vote for Donald Trump. I voted for Jill Stein, but I can say very much that as a, former Sanders supporter during 2016, it was difficult, if not impossible, to fathom voting for Hillary. And it really, as I believe Julian Assange called it, he said basically it was like a choice between cholera and gonorrhea. I mean, it was really not something where any of us felt happy trying to go to the polls in 2016. So I really do hope that we don't have that type of situation again. And I'm afraid, especially after reading your article, that if Harris is the nominee, that's basically the situation we'll be facing again on a lot of different fronts and facets of her policy.
I'm afraid that's true. My children are millennials, and they were dyed in the wool Bernie supporters, still love Bernie, love Elizabeth Warren, and detest Kamala Harris, don't trust her. In fact, one of my sons encouraged me to write this article and sent me research for it, and was very pleased when I wrote it. And he's a millennial, so I don't know if he would vote for Kamala Harris. I would if she were the nominee. Just don't know.
I agree. I think that that is a really sobering assessment, that we're at that point politically where the DNC would rather field a neoliberal who has less of a chance to win than actually go with its base, which so, enthusiastically supported Sanders. And I think that that crisis of identity in the Democratic Party has just really not been solved. It was put on hold by Russiagate. It was not really looked at. And I think that that's one of the most dangerous things that we're watching the DNC face now as we go into the primary process and the election in 2020. Do you think that there will be a resolution to that during this process, or is it just going to be put on hold again?
I don't think they can avoid it. I mean, because of the contradiction that's coming out now between Pelosi and these young progressive women in the House. It's erupting into the open. Now, one thing that we need to keep in mind is that the Democrats did extremely well in the 2018 midterms, and that was in spite of the cheating, the voter suppression, etc. But many of the progressives won in safe districts, did not take seats away from people who were not progressive. So I don't think that we can rest on the victory of 2018, but I think that we should be encouraged that it is possible. And we're not just talking about the presidency here, because the Democrat could win the presidency. The Democrats could hold on to the House and still not take back the Senate. It's very, very closely divided. There are just a few seats. I think the Democrats have to take back 4 seats to take back the Senate, and taking back the Senate is critical. Getting rid of Mitch McConnell, who is setting the agenda for legislation about war and peace for the Supreme Court, for any number of things, for immigration. He is one of the most dangerous men in the country and indeed in the world. And I would put him right up there with Donald Trump. So I think it's critical that we not just focus on the presidential election, but focus also on keeping the House in Democratic hands. And the House has done some very progressive things since the Democrats took over in 2018, and taking back the Senate.
Marjorie, we're bringing in Mike Ravel, Senator Mike Ravel. We need to go to a musical break. Could you stay with us? I'd like you to hear what Mike has to say and then to join in the discussion.
I can stay for a few minutes.
Okay. If you can't, we'll say goodbye to you now. But if you pop up again, that would be great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.